Hi, I'm Sravish. This is Trust Talks, a series celebrating innovation, companies, and people who make GRC, security, and privacy into a trusted and revenue-generating function. Today, I have with me Thomas Owen, the Chief Information Security Officer at Grafana Labs, probably the most technical CISO you will ever hear from. Hi, Thomas. How are you?
Hey, that's a terrifying praise and almost certainly inaccurate, but thank you.
On that note, let's get started. Thomas, first question for you. How have you made GRC more accessible, transparent, and accountable at Grafana? What do you think are the best steps that CISOs should follow?
That's an interesting question. Transparency and accountability are two values that I hold very dear personally, and Grafana holds very dear professionally. One of the things that we have baked into the sort of fabric of our organization is distributed accountability. I'd say I don't claim to be a technical CISO, but I think of myself as a product CISO. So I care about engineers and engineering things. And we really follow the DevOps model quite strongly. We say there is an engineering team and they own a vertical full stack slice of a value proposition, and they own all of the non-functional requirements, including security and compliance. And that's fantastic. Like that's good. That is the right way to build good product at scale. Those things are really hard. Before DevOps was a term that was coined, we had security teams and quality assurance teams and ops teams that ran things, and there were discrete defined centers of excellence and expertise to make these things occur. And then we went DevOps and we said, cool, now, I'm simplifying, but now front-end engineer with 2 years of experience outside of university, you're responsible for all of those things. And they went, and then the product manager said, ship sheet features faster, and it stopped working. It's all about observability for me. Like, you can make someone accountable for something only if you make the nature of their accountability and the data they need to be accountable and make good decisions transparent and observable. So that's something that we are trying to improve on, that we believe very strongly. You can't make someone accountable if they don't have an ability to execute on that accountability. But you can, but you're setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, and things that we really care about are positive outcomes.
I love that idea. How do you translate security and privacy and compliance requirements into product requirements? Because I imagine to enable the strategy you just implemented or you talked about, you'd have to be that translation engine to let the product team know what they need to do from a requirement standpoint. How do you do that at Grafana?
I operate in my brain basically operates in trite little marketing sound bites. One of the ones I care a lot about is security, then compliance. So privacy, slightly different. And that's an interesting subset of almost user journeys and user flows inside of a product or inside of a process more organizationally. My view is if you have an ability to reliably and verifiably develop secure product, then you already have the maturity in the process and the expertise distributed amongst the teams to be able to deliver a product that is secure. Privacy is different, like privacy being an overlay of different requirements on top of pure security. You just add some more features into the mix. Actually, we should care about not just that we use data safely, but also the human factors of how we use data. It's just another layer on top of that. But security, then compliance. Compliance is a product of good security process, not an end to itself. So you just break it down into system specifics.
I like that analogy, security, then compliance. To take it one step further, compliance often drives revenue because when you are talking to customers, they want to evaluate your compliance program to assess the risk of working with you or not working with you. So how does GRC at Grafana support the revenue function?
So we have a function that's a very important part of GRC called, or as we call it, assurance, which is called customer trust. So customer trust team's job is to be the human interface between customer-facing needs and asks and what we do in reality and the plans we have in the future. And they're very different languages and very different semantics, but it's important to be able to map the two. Effectively, they are the team that leverages and articulates the security investments we make to enable more revenue. So at a sort of humans, how does this work day-to-day function piece, we have specialists that do this, that are responsible for mapping those things together. Practically speaking, I mean, it's answering questionnaires, it's filling in RFPs, it's writing content, it's effectively developing the shop storefront that you would use to capture drive-by sales. The shop storefront is very attractive and very well laid out. Therefore, I want to go in and buy stuff. In this case, the shop storefront is very trustworthy. So, hey, let's go further. I think it gets a bit more interesting when you get down to specific contractual clauses or improvement programs particularly. So from a technology perspective and from a product feature perspective, it's effectively a product. Product managers already do this. Like, we require feature X in the product, and it's linked to these customer needs, and therefore it has this revenue contribution. Cool. Why is security any different? I'm frustrated continually by the industry in general that when you have a security team, they don't have product managers, because that's an entire skill set and human engine in the loop that's required in order to articulate that. I think it gets a little bit more easy when you are looking at vertical or sector specific compliance accreditations. So as an example, this is not speaking for Grafana, which is a theoretical fiction organization. Wouldn't it be nice if we could capture more e-commerce business? Well, let's go and get PCI DSS version blah to this level, articulate it pretty nicely, and that gives us access to total addressable market Y.
Yeah.
I think there's you can then have the sales organization do some clever maths that says we'll expect to capitalize on X percentage of that. Therefore, this accreditation is worth that over this time frame. And again, you don't always see that. I mean, it's really only applicable to product organizations. If I were, a water utility company, I'd probably have a very different calculus. But then that calculus would also be measured slightly in human lives, and that's probably quite compelling too.
I love how you're creating sort of this hierarchical approach to security. We started with security, then we went to compliance, then we talked about revenue, and then you talked about how product can be influenced from a security standpoint. Let's take it up one notch further. What kind of metrics do you think that CISOs should be sharing with their boards of directors so that you can educate them on the business impact of your security program, your compliance program, and your privacy program?
Metrics. Not a dirty word, but a terrifying one. I'm always slightly suspicious of metrics and the way that they can generate perverse incentives. We're quite careful on what metrics we provide to the board. We have Grafana's leadership is still the original technical co-founders. I can go to our CEO and talk about a cross-site scripting vulnerability, and basically understands what I'm talking about. It's I'm unusually fortunate in my role here. And ditto the CFO. I can talk to the CFO about technology things, and the CFO understands. So I'm missing a whole layer of translation that I don't have to worry about, which I think is probably spoiling me and will massively de-skill me for future roles, which is unfortunate. But I'm really careful about metrics. As far as I'm concerned, if an effort or a focus or a project or initiative is well formed, you should be able to boil it down to a very small number of metrics. In the same way that if you're an experienced entrepreneur, the best products you can describe in 20 words or less. If you can boil it down to something really simple and really compelling, then it's obviously got something special about it. So, for instance, we run our own bug bounty, and relatively unusual at our scale. We have no partner or platform do it. We don't work with HackerOne or BugCrowd. We own the entire thing because we care very much about the relationship with an experience of the researcher. Because we're an open source company, the researcher community and the open source community overlap a lot. We value that voice and that brand very tightly. So let's maintain control. But it means that we only have two metrics, two KPIs for our bug bounty, and one is time to first response, and one is researcher satisfaction. As far as we're concerned, if you can respond to submissions rapidly and the researcher has a good experience, they're going to come back and do good work for you again. And again, it's a perverse incentive to say, hey, we should have more or less reports. Like, you have the amounts of reports that your code base and the nature of your program allows. We should have declining number of findings over time or decline severity. That's incorrect. We should spend more or less on our bug bounty. Again, the pay schedule you have for your bounty is dependent on many factors and not a legitimate representation. One of the KPIs we do report is number of person hours spent on customer trust, on actively supporting revenue generating things versus the amount of revenue we generate, and then segment it by verticals. And that's in the same way that bug bounties are one of those, because again, it's financially driven. Like, you can say, we have found X number of problems for Y cost. It's really easy to articulate that, and you can very easily evidence the ROI on it. Again, there can be a 20 or 30 person engineering team on the background making all of these controls work, but ultimately then you then go, and through this work, we enabled 70% of last year's revenue. The board go, cool, we want to keep you around.
That's great. I love the tie to revenue from a board standpoint. And you also use the word assurance. Will we ever live in a world, Thomas, where the CISO also talks about assurance to the board and talks about how the security and privacy program maps to the contractual commitments and how we're enabling contractual assurance through the activities that we're doing?
Yeah, I think if they're not already doing it, they're missing a trick. Both in terms, I feel as though I'm both required to and empowered to be quite opinionated about our default contractual language, both customer facing and supply chain facing. And especially when major customers then ask for deltas on our contractual language or bring their own paper, the customer trust or the senior leadership and security, myself down through the assurance team, we're very tightly involved in being very opinionated and ultimately a blocking stakeholder on some of these things. We get to say yes or no to some things, which is relatively unusual in a place like Grafana, where it's all about fuzzy consensus and sort of debate and dialogue. Tracking those deltas and the impact and the revenue implications and investment implications of those deltas is hard. It is an unsolved problem.
Switching gears, have you worked with any vendors in the security space or the privacy space that you admire for pushing the envelope on how you could be more transparent and how you could be more trusted and accountable and improve your organization's commitment to trust?
Yeah, I mean, I have internally I have my CISO screed of woes, my CISO diatribe, where I talk about the fact that I really dislike being a CISO because I have to buy security products and universally oversold, overpriced, and under-delivering. But occasionally one comes along and genuinely solves a problem. I like things that solve a problem, not necessarily give you another step to eventually solving a problem. Like outcomes are outcomes. Are we safer today than we were yesterday? Are we pretty confident we'll be safer tomorrow than today? Kolide, I think you and I have discussed it in the past. Kolide is a really astonishing platform that actually solves a problem. I'm sure they would criticize me and say they're much more than that, but as far as I'm concerned, they are OS query with a really sexy user-centric user interface on top of it. So it gives a central IT or security team posture validation and visibility of what your endpoints are doing, certainly how what they're doing, how they're configured. Are they difficult to compromise from my perspective? What they really do is that Kollide's primary role and functionality is to empower the individual who has that machine to manage it themselves according to a centralized policy, understand what their exposures are, improve them themselves. We've been working with Kolide actually to even extend that further to say, here are the privacy impacts of Kolide and the things that we're centrally running on your machine. Like, here's what central admin's been doing on your machine. Here's what they've looked at. Here's what they've seen. Here's the things that you can control for them. Blah, 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 blah. It's all about giving agency through transparency to the end user, fundamentally for a corporate machine, which is pretty high-end kind of stuff. And it solves it. Like it actually solves a problem, which, again, is pretty unheard of. I'm fairly jaded these days. Those products where you never have to leave the product, you enter the product, and for any given user journey, you remain it to the point that you go, and this is done, and I need to go do something else now. They're rare but incredibly valuable. I
agree with you. I think Kolide is one of the few security companies that I've seen that meets the end user where they are versus forcing the end user to come into the product. That's part one of their differentiation. I think the other thing the other thing that Kolide does brilliantly is they help the end user understand the impact of negligence and almost makes you feel guilty and anxious, but not to the point where you get frustrated, but to the point where you actually have to act. And the anxiousness and the guilt gets people to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, far be it for me to use fear and certainty in doubt to sell a thing, but it works sometimes, doesn't it? If you keep that powder dry and use it very occasionally, it's very effective. I actually think the opposite. I think in terms of it, it's the mechanism by which it works. Certainly that's the outcome. Like users go and do stuff on the back of Kolide alerts and they do stuff and the machine is safer and more compliant to policy. I really like the way that it again meets the user where they live. Like most of our end users, I would go at them and say probably all of our users don't log into Kolide. They just interact with it via Slack.
Yeah.
And it just fits into their native workflows and their daily life, which is, again, wonderful.
I think the other thing that Kolide inspires me personally is that they take away the big brother aspect of security and creates a culture of security in the organization where you're telling your employees, I trust you, I expect you to do the right thing, and I'm giving you the capability to do it easily and quickly so that it's not a burden on your day-to-day activities. But it, again, translates this idea that we're building an empowered organization where we're all involved in security.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great point. The end user is fundamentally and intrinsically in the loop for the ultimate impacts, the decisions they make. And we still have the centralized visibility, we have the ability to backstop them, so they're not accountable for it. And they're not even necessarily entirely responsible, but they are involved. And that's quite a big deal. I think an engineer, a software developer that's worth their stripes understands that from the perspective of the systems that they build and operate. Yeah, that sort of ideally something that's baked into their personality.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily reliable. They wouldn't necessarily think about that from the point of their endpoint security. And then you look at someone in, let's say, a sales team, and they have no idea. And Kolide is something that allows them to interface that problem in a way that they can grok really easily.
Yeah. Well, the next time I have to get you to come to Boston, Jason, the CEO of Kolide, is a good friend. And I'm going to make him take you out to an amazing dinner for this fantastic testimonial.
Kolide solves the endpoint security problem from a configuration manager perspective. I've never seen anything like it. It is astonishing.
Switching gears, Thomas, who are some security leaders or privacy leaders or CISOs who've inspired you? Who do you look up to? Who do you learn from?
I'm a bit old-fashioned, really. I still enjoy reading things from the people that were doing this when I was first getting started. So Bruce Schneier, one of them. I mean, I remember. What was it? It was just in the post 9/11 era when a lot cybersecurity was still information security, as I remember, and Treasure. He wrote a book. I forgot the name of it. He wrote a book effectively about security theatre, and that was really formative for me. Again, security then compliance. If you extrapolate that out a bit, the concept of a paper control or security theatre is anathema. It's worse than embarrassing to have. And something that we should all aspire to absolutely eliminate for our organizations and our security postures, our security programs. He's always been a very impressive thinker. I've always really enjoyed the way that he thinks and writes. I used to be a regular consumer of, I think it was Cryptogram, his newsletter. And also I quite like history, and he's a big medieval history enthusiast. So that's good. And then Dan Geer, if you're familiar with it. He's the guy, I've forgotten the name of it, but he used to be the leader of the public investment arm of either the CIA or DARPA. Most amazing sideburns. Actually, that's something that's vaguely related to. I feel like both he and Bruce Schneier have got like memorable haircuts and wonderfully so. But yeah, Dan Geer. He had some really interesting writing style. Very deep thinker. It's the sort of thing where you'd read 1,000 words spiel from him, and you just go, "Oh, I've had some of my fundamental assumptions of life challenged, and this is a conversation about a security problem. But actually, I'm going to go and re-examine my life direction." And it had this, his intonation and phrasing was almost like a Lincoln-esque statesman-like. There was sort of overriding oratory about it that I always found very, very compelling. Not necessarily like, hey, this is how you talk to an engineer that's interested in a problem, or how you get investment from a board. But if you want to write something that stands up as philosophical debate for the next couple of centuries, I think Dan Geer's approach was always really, really good stuff.
Thomas, I wish I had recorded the first part of this podcast a little differently. Instead of introducing you as the most technical CISO I've met, I should have introduced you as the CISO with the most amazing beard who gives the acting team of the movie 300 a run for their money.
Thank you. It's migrated from there to here. So look at the back.
Maybe we should record that. Maybe after we end, we should record the beginning again with that statement. And I like that it's moved from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, it's just migrating.
Speaking of people that inspire you, in addition to mentors and people you look up to, we're also inspired by colleagues we work with. Who do you see as folks who are custodians of trust in your organization? Who are trust champions that have been your colleagues or have been on your team that has done inspiring work?
Oh, that's complicated. I mean, I've had the fortune of building almost my entire team from the ground up at Grafana, and something about, I know it is, Grafana is an astonishing organization. And I'm very fortunate in that I have the ability to hire incredibly interesting, talented, right-thinking people because Grafana and the mission and open source and all of these good things. I would struggle to call out specific people from my team. I work with a chap called Jeremy Matos, who I think is the archetype. I'm going to be remiss if he's not on the show. I think he's the archetype of a principal security engineer. I think anyone that ever works with Jeremy should basically just go, what can I do to copy him? The way he thinks about problems from a practical, real perspective. When I joined Grafana, our security maturity was like, security was well executed across the business, but completely decentralized because I was effectively patient zero of the security team. Like, hey, this is great. The next scaling opportunity will be let's centralize security expertise at least and bake out more maturity and consistency across the business. One of the first things I had to do when I joined was tune down our vulnerability management response, because every time we had a vulnerability detected, we treated it like an incident. And Jeremy really is the custodian of that concept. Like, here is a security problem. Great. Let's position it inside a real systems context. Let's figure out what its real impact is, and then let's talk practically and materially about what the problem really is and how and whether and when we should fix it. I know that the engineers across the organization really enjoy talking to Jeremy, because he tends to go, this thing you brought me that you're really worried about, don't worry about it. That thing, however, that thing you might want to worry about. And that's always a really interesting conversation. You know, they come away within half an hour of meeting Jeremy, they come away with an action plan, unblocked, understanding where their priorities are. It's about enabling the other engineers, and that's something. And I would say I don't work with her currently. I know you know her as well. The single best colleague I've ever had is Annie O'Rourke, who's currently at Sneak. The single best GRC leader I've ever come across. I was very fortunate to work with Annie. We basically followed each other through jobs for over a decade. Finding myself at Grafana without Annie was a bit like, oh God, I have to do GRC again. I've sort of de-skilled myself by just going, there's an Annie, and it's brilliant. She's also, that undersells her. She's also an incredible business leader. There's a couple of gigs ago, she was the COO who I reported into, and she transformed the organization when she took it over as effectively the functional business leader. The MD was relatively absent. Absolutely incredible person, and you should have her as your product person. Or you should very much pay attention to her product decisions and ambitions and suggestions. Anything she tells you to do is going to be a worthwhile feature to implement.
Finally, Thomas, what do you think we would be doing differently in security and compliance 3 to 5 years from now?
Yes.
That's an evil laugh if I've ever heard one.
I in security, I've got a range of those. There's a menu of them you can select from. I think that the current security market is really overbaked. I think there are a lot of organizations competing to solve the same problems. And again, most are oversold, overpriced, and underdeliver. And I think that trend will change. I think some clear winners will emerge. I think that will be, there's a current trend that drives, it's the standard startup path, right? You start an organization, you get good at one product proposition, one USP, one feature delivery, one set of features. And then you hit the top of your evaluation, you have to go platform in order to expand further. You have to go, well, okay, here are some tenuously related things that we can acquire or try and tack on and sort of build to because ultimately they're all empires, you grow or die. And I see there's a real, again, perverse incentive at the moment for product-led organizations that are incredibly good at one thing to become not very good at many things. I think that's weird. And I see the industry, I don't know what the industry is going to do about that, but I don't think it's going to sustain. I think that's going to be something we look back on and go, that was a weird time. I think the current economic word that you could use to describe the current state of the economy is not a symptom of that, but I think is going to accelerate some of that change. And my favorite thing about my CISO diatribe screed of woes is, hey, security is a data-driven industry, in that create loads and loads of data and absolutely no insight or action. And I think, again, that's going to be a big difference. Increasingly, when I have conversations with business leaders in Grafana or elsewhere, if you come and go, if the talk track is, here are some data points and trends that I care about, they go, and if they know anything about your data sources, they also go, 90% of that data is not very good. If you come and go, here are the outcomes I care about, here are the end states that I want to achieve, and here's how we're going to do it. That's much more interesting. And again, I think we're going to see products like Kolide come out that care very much and are very opinionated about outcomes, not inputs. I think currently the security industry cares about inputs, or we incentivize and sell things based on inputs. Hey, product X creates data. I mean, that's complicated, and there's a bunch of things to solve, but the data doesn't enable an outcome by itself.
Thomas, I love that. Can we live in a world where we start with business outcomes and measure the effectiveness of security and privacy program against those business outcomes? That would be fantastic.
I'll steal that for my next board slide. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today on Trust Talks. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. Pleasure.